The First Afghan War was fought between 1839 and 1842 and is mainly remembered for the destruction of Elphinstone's army, in which the 44th Regiment of Foot was all but wiped out. It did result in the awarding of 4 medals, but all were issued by the British East India Company, not by the Crown, and have therefore not been included in this series. The Second Afghan War was fought between 1878 and 1880, and mainly as a result of political manoeuvring between Britain and Russia, Afghanistan being in the unfortunate position of being between them. The British government rather liked having a buffer between the Russian Empire and its valuable Indian territories, so when in the summer of 1878 the Russians sent an uninvited delegation to Kabul, the British demanded that a similar delegation be received from London. The Afghan leader, Sher Ali Khan, who had been put into an awkward position by the unwelcome Russian arrival, told the British that their mission was also not welcome, but further, if they attempted to enter Afghanistan they would be stopped. Lord Lytton, the Viceroy of India, ordered a diplomatic mission to be sent out for Kabul in September 1878, but the mission was turned back as it approached the eastern entrance of the Khyber Pass. The British, slighted by the refusal and worried about Russian intentions in the region, subsequently invaded Afghanistan in November 1878, when a British force of about 50,000 fighting men, mostly Indians, was distributed into 3 military columns which penetrated Afghanistan at 3 different points. The first engagement of the Second Afghan War took place at the border fortress of Ali Masjid. Nearly 4,000 men under the command of Sir Samuel J. Brown approached the fortress on the 21st of November, and at about midday artillery from both sides began firing. The Afghans resisted doggedly, but their older round-shot ammunition was no match for British shells. After about 2 hours of shelling, the British infantry advanced on the fortress, but as they came within storming distance the attack was postponed until the next day. However, when the British arose in the morning, it was found that the Afghans had deserted the fortress during the night. The retreating Afghans left behind 40 wounded men and 21 cannon. Brown's force suffered 50 casualties killed or wounded, but the British victory meant that the northern approach to Kabul was left virtually undefended, and they were able to reach Dhaka with relative ease. They spent the winter camped safely at Jalalabad. 2 weeks later, and 100 kilometres to the east, Major General Frederick Roberts led his force of 3,000 men into Afghanistan towards Kabul through the heavily defended Pewar Pass. The Afghan defenders included regular forces reinforced by local tribesmen who had established themselves in a strongly fortified position on a mountain overlooking the pass. On the 1st of December, Roberts ordered preparations for a frontal attack directly facing the main Afghan position. This was, however, a feint, and that night Roberts led the main body of his force around the flank of the Afghan defences. His attack on the morning of the 2nd of December took the Afghans by surprise and, realising that their line of retreat was threatened, retreated from the battlefield. Roberts lost 100 men killed or wounded, but as at Ali Masjid the victory left the road to Kabul wide open. With the British advancing and Kabul defenceless, Sher Ali Khan had little choice but to surrender, but before he could do so he died, leaving his son and successor Muhammad Yaqub Khan to sign the Treaty of Gandamac in May of 1879 to prevent a British invasion of the rest of the country. According to this treaty, Yaqub relinquished control of Afghan foreign affairs to Britain. British representatives were installed in Kabul and other locations. British control was extended to the Khyber and Minchi passes, and Afghanistan ceded various northwest frontier province areas and Quetta to Britain. The British Army then withdrew. The man sent as the British representative, the somewhat French-sounding Pierre-Louis Napoleon Cavagnari, took up his post in July of 1879, but it didn't last long. On the 3rd of September, Cavagnari and the other European members of the mission, along with their guards, were killed after he refused demands of mutinous Afghan troops. Naturally, the British took a dim view of this, and the second phase of the war began. Retribution was swift. Major General Sir Frederick Roberts led the Kabul Field Force, consisting of 20 field guns and 7,500 men, over the Shattergarden Pass into central Afghanistan, heading for Kabul. After small skirmishes along the way, he met a force of 8,000 Afghan troops dug in at Chirasiab, 12 miles from Kabul. The next morning, the 6th of October, saw a large force of regular Afghan troops, equipped with artillery and reinforced by local tribesmen on the ridge of the hills ahead. Attacking first, Roberts's force feinted to the left of the Afghan line before launching his main attack to the right. The fighting lasted several hours, but eventually the Afghan army was pushed back, and by 4 p.m. the British-led force had opened the route to Kabul. After this, Roberts resumed his advance and occupied Kabul on the 13th of October. British casualties amounted to 18 killed and 70 wounded, while Afghans' deaths exceeded 300. 20 Afghan field guns were captured. The British force were equipped with 2 Gatling guns, with Chirasiab the first time these rapid-fire guns had been used in action. With Kabul itself vulnerable to attack, Roberts based his force in the unfinished Sherpa cantonment, a mile north of the city. At the end of November, an Afghan army gathered in the area north of Kabul. On the 11th of December, a small detachment of the 9th Queen's Royal Lancers and the 14th Bengal Lancers encountered a 10,000-strong Afghan army advancing on Kabul. In an attempt to delay the advance, the outnumbered Lancers charged the Afghans. Heavy casualties were suffered, and the Afghans continued their advance. On the 15th of December, the Afghan army began to besiege the British forces entrenched in the Sherpa cantonment. But when news of an approaching relief column reached them on the 23rd of December, they tried to take the makeshift fort by storm. By midday, the assault had been repulsed, and the Afghan army dispersed. The Afghans lost over 3,000 killed or wounded, the British just 33. While Roberts was defeating the Afghans at Chirasiab and Kabul, 500 kilometres to the west, Lieutenant General Donald Stewart reoccupied Kandahar following Cavagnari's murder. In March, he left the city with 7,500 men to march to Kabul to relieve and reinforce Roberts, leaving behind a garrison of 4,000 men under the command of Lieutenant General James Primrose. On the way, Stewart's force encountered an Afghan army at Ahmad Khel. Here, at a point where the road narrowed, a force of about 12,000 to 15,000 Afghan tribesmen was in place along the hills, threatening the column's flank. As Stewart began to reposition his men to respond, the mass of Afghan tribesmen rushed over the hills and attacked. While the British-led force had difficulty in holding their line, the Afghans were eventually driven back and, after an hour-long fierce fight, the tribesmen fled. The Afghans suffered heavy casualties, 2,000 to 3,000 killed, compared with British and Indian losses of just 17 dead and 124 wounded. Stewart continued on to Kabul, reaching the city on the 1st of May 1880, taking over command of the Kabul field force from Roberts the following day. The British did not, however, have it all their own way. Ayub Khan, Sher Ali Khan's younger son, who had been holding Herat during the British operations at Kabul and Kandahar, set out towards Kandahar with a small army in June. Primrose dispatched a brigade under Brigadier General Burrows from Kandahar to oppose him. On the afternoon of the 26th of July, information was received that the Afghan force was making for the Maiwan Pass. Burrows decided to move early the following day to break up the Afghan advance guard. At about 10 a.m, horsemen were seen and engaged, and the brigade started to deploy for battle. Burrows was not aware that it was Ayub's main force. The Afghans numbered 25,000, including Afghan regular troops and 5 batteries of artillery. The Afghan guns came gradually into action, and a 3-hour artillery duel ensued. For once, the Afghan forces had some modern guns, and these enabled the Afghans to force the battalion back. The left flank, comprising of Indian infantry regiments, gave way and rolled in a great wave to the right. The 66th Regiment, as a result of this pressure, was swept away by the pressure of the Afghan attack. E Battery of B Brigade, Royal Horse Artillery and half a company of Bombay sappers and miners stood fast, covering the retreat of the entire brigade. E Battery kept firing until the last moment, with 4 guns limbering up and the Afghans just metres away. 2 others were overrun. E Battery came into action some 400 metres back, and the sappers and miners retreated as the guns withdrew. They joined some remnants of the 66th Foot and Bombay Grenadiers in a small enclosure where a determined last stand was made. Although the Afghans shot them down one by one, they fired steadily until only 11 of their number were left. The survivors then charged out into the masses of the enemy and perished. No Englishman lived to tell the story of the last 11 at Maiwand. It was reported to the British later that year by a former officer of Ayub Khan's army, who said that the Afghans had been truly impressed by the bravery of those men. Word of the defeat reached Kandahar the following day, and Primrose sent a relief force who met the remnants of the brigade retreating back to the city. The British had been routed but managed a withdrawal. Of the 2,476 British troops engaged, the British and Indian force lost 969 killed and 178 men wounded. They also lost the artillery and the Queen's and regimental colours of the 66th Regiment of Foot. Following so soon after the loss of the colours of the 24th Regiment at the Battle of Isandwana 18 months earlier, during the Anglo-Zulu War, these two disasters resulted in regimental colours no longer being taken on active service. The remnants of the struggling column reached Kandahar on the 28th, raising the garrison number to 4,360. The Afghan population of 12,000 were forced to leave. The whole garrison withdrew behind the walls of the fortified city and organised preparations for its defence. The Afghans determined to harass and hinder the defenders' preparations throughout. On hearing the news of the Maiwand disaster, Stewart, at Kabul, dispatched Roberts with a division of about 10,000 men to march back the 500 kilometres to relieve the besieged garrison at Kandahar. Of the 10,000 men under Roberts's command, a little over 2,800 were Europeans, and all the troops were ordered to travel light and, controversially, no wheeled transport was to be taken. Mules, donkeys and ponies would be utilised to carry the main supplies. With temperatures exceeding 100 degrees Fahrenheit and very little shade, sore feet and constant scarcity of water adding to the extreme discomfort, the entire column of men, followers and baggage took just 20 days, an average of over 20 kilometres a day. The followers alone included nearly 2,200 bearers, 4,700 transport men and over 1,200 servants. Although the march was unhindered by the Afghans, it was a historic and remarkable feat of human endurance and organisation. On the morning of the 31st of August 1880, the relief force reached Kandahar to find that the siege had been lifted and the Afghan army retired north to a town at Masra. Cavalry reconnaissance was ordered, and on the 1st of September, Roberts ordered the attack. The Battle of Kandahar started at 9 a.m. with the usual exchange of artillery, and the British advancing on two small villages defended by well-entrenched Afghans. They put up determined resistance to the attack that included a bayonet charge by the 92nd Highlanders. Both sides suffered casualties, but the Afghans came off far worse. As the British advanced towards the third village, they again met with heavy resistance, as the Afghans were reinforced from the main camp at Masra. But again, after heavy fighting, the Afghans were dislodged at bayonet point. The British then paused while Roberts assessed the situation, and the troops regrouped and replenished their ammunition. However, this delay provided the Afghans with some respite, and when the British finally entered Masra at 1 p.m, it was deserted. Ayub Khan's army was now in full rout, and although a plan for the cavalry to intercept the retreating Afghans did not work, it was clear that the British had achieved a decisive victory. The Battle of Kandahar brought a close to the Second Afghan War. Ayub Khan had been decisively beaten. He had lost a whole of his artillery, his camp, enormous quantities of ammunition, and about 1,000 men killed. The British lost 320 killed or wounded. The British appointed Abdur Rahman as Emir of Afghanistan under a protectorate which gave Britain control of Afghanistan's foreign policy. They also retained the frontier territory ceded by the Treaty of Gandamac. Having achieved many of their war aims, the British withdrew from Afghanistan, the last troops leaving in April 1881. There nearly wasn't a medal for the Second Afghan War, as it was initially proposed to issue some clasps for the existing India General Service Medal. But after the battles of the second half of the conflict, a medal was sanctioned on the 19th of March 1881. The medal, made of fine silver, is 36 mm in diameter and engraved by Leonard Wyon. The obverse, designed by medallist Joseph Boehm, shows a veiled effigy of Queen Victoria facing left, with Victoria Regina et Imperatrix, translated to Victoria, Queen and Empress, around the edge. The reverse, designed by book illustrator Randolph Caldecott, shows a marching and mounting column of soldiers, bearing arms, with an elephant carrying a cannon. In the upper left of the medal, around the edge, is the word Afghanistan, and in the exergue, in a straight line, are the dates 1878, 79, 80. The medal hangs from its ribbon with a plain silver swivelling suspender, which is attached to the medal with a double-toed claw. The ribbon is 33 mm wide and is dark green with broad crimson edges. 6 clasps were authorised for the medal, but the most any one man was awarded was 4. The first was for the action at Ali Mushid, and the second for Piwa Kotal, both of the actions as a result of the initial invasion by the British. The third was awarded for Cherasia for the battle on the 6th of October 1879, and the fourth for Kabul for the siege between the 10th and the 23rd of December 1879. The fifth, for Ahmed Kell, was for the battle led by Sir Donald Stewart on the 19th of April 1880 during his march from Kandahar to Kabul, and lastly, the sixth class for Kandahar is for the last battle under Frederick Roberts on the 1st of September 1880 following his march from Kabul to Kandahar. The recipient's rank, name and unit are engraved in upright or sloping capitals on the rim of the medal, like this one to Patrick Crowley of the 10th Royal Hussars. A second medal was issued to some of the troops who took part in the campaign. As with the disaster at Isandwana and the public need for a triumph to balance the books, in that case Rorke's Drift, the disaster at Maiwand needed a similar counterbalance, and Roberts's incredible march from Kabul to Kandahar was perfect. Initially declined, but at the pressing of Roberts himself, a medal was issued to all the men who took part in any part of the famous march. The medal, known as the Kabul to Kandahar Star, was made from guns captured at the Battle of Kandahar, and is a 5-pointed star, 62 mm high and 48 mm wide, suspended by an imperial crown. In the middle of the obverse is the royal monogram VRI, surrounded by the text Kabul to Kandahar, 1880. The reverse is plain with a hollow centre, with the name of the recipient around the edge. The ribbon is a watered silk pattern with a rainbow of blue, white, yellow, white, red, a design used by several campaign medals of the former East India Company, including 3 of the medals issued for the First Afghan War mentioned at the beginning of this video, and represents an eastern sky at sunrise. The medal was manufactured by Henry Jenkins and Sons of Birmingham. Some 11,000 were eventually issued. This example was awarded to William Durham of the 2nd Battalion of the 60th Foot. Thank you for watching, and join me again next time when I return to the African continent, but this time to the land of the Pharaohs.